I think we're in a even more dangerous time right now. Really sad to report that to you. January 6th, I think it'll go down as just this incredibly important inflection point in this moment. I don't know exactly how the story will end, but I do think that this day will be seen as a defining day of this era of American politics. And it's on me and many others to try to hopefully give the ending to make it a better ending than what we've seen so far.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to this January 6th edition of the Mayday Podcast. I could not think of a better dream guest than we are going to have today. Senator Andy Kim was a member of the House of Representatives 5 years ago on January 6, 2021, when an insurrection overtook our Capitol. Insurrectionists broke into our Capitol, defaced it, attacked it, and tried to subvert our democracy. There is an incredible photograph of Andy Kim, which you could see here, on his hands and knees, cleaning up the mess that they made in the rotunda of the United States Capitol. That picture has become so iconic that his blue wool suit was taken to the Smithsonian, where it was supposed to be displayed until the Trump administration decided that they were not going to display it anymore in their attempt to erase the dark, dark days leading up to, on, and following January 6th. Michelle, I truly can't think of anybody I'd want to talk to more today.
He was the first person that I thought of, honestly, because I remember seeing that photograph or those photographs that were taken of him that evening, because they had gone back to work to do the votes and the debate and everything. And then it was after that he was in the halls of Congress picking up and helping to clean up the ruins of the halls of Congress, of our Capitol building. And I remember feeling so struck by that. It broke my heart. It broke my heart. And because there's so many different vantage points to that day, right? There's people like, the senator that was there serving in the House of Representatives at the time. There are our law enforcement, Capitol Police, Metropolitan Police officers. There are the staffers. There are the people that in the media that were there, capturing this story, trying to tell the story. And then there's the thousands of insurrectionists, 1,600, 1,500 of which Donald Trump has now pardoned. Recently, I was watching some clips of January 6th. I forget why. I think I was working on a video or something, and I was going through them. It was the first time I'd really watched them in a long time, Julie. And I have to be honest, I sat on my couch and cried because I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it. And the fact they're telling us now it didn't happen. This didn't happen, or,
It was a day of love, as the president of the United States calls it. It was a day of love.
Yes, a day of love. Mm-hmm.
I don't think Senator Kim or any other people who were there that day, including Republicans who ran for their lives, starting with people like Josh Hawley, certainly Mike Pence, will call it a day of love. It was a day of infamy that will go down in the history of the United States as possibly the darkest day in our nearly 250-year history, because it was self-inflicted. It was self-inflicted. On that note, without further ado, Senator Andy Kim. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. Really great to have you here, especially today on January 6th, which you played such a key role in. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. Before we get to this horrible 50th year anniversary of January 6th, we want to just talk to you briefly about Venezuela, and just to get your perspective on what in the world is going on. Are we colonizing the Western Hemisphere now? Is that how you see it, or is something else happening?
Well, what we see regardless is a very dangerous situation. And I say that as someone who's worked in national security. I worked in Afghanistan. I spent time in Iraq. as a civilian embedded with the military. And what I'll just say is, with a situation like this, there's so many ways that it can go wrong, and so many ways where that can impact our servicemen and women, the American people. And this administration just hasn't put in the kind of strategic thinking and planning to be able to handle this all. And I just find that to be so alarming. I mean, just a couple weeks ago, we did a briefing with Secretaries Rubio and Hegseth, and they blatantly just told us that regime change was not what they were trying to accomplish. And then all of a sudden we see what they undertook. And so it's hard for me or anybody to trust the words coming out of their mouths. I think the closest thing that we see right now is basically Trump unveiling his foreign policy doctrine, which is basically an extortion foreign policy. He is undergoing what I call mob boss tactics. He does it in domestic policy, and now we're seeing him doing it in foreign policy, where he's using our military as a means to coerce leaders of another country to basically agree to everything we want when it comes to getting American oil companies into Venezuela. And that seems to be the overwhelming goal and drive of this now, which I just find to be so shocking.
The Trump administration just said that they don't anticipate that Denmark will deploy their military to defend Greenland. And so therefore, we're just going to come in and take it. How do you see this ending? How do you see this playing out?
Well, look, I mean, this is a betrayal of so much of what our country has tried to establish over the last 100 years, to move away from this idea of great powers and spheres of influence, and to try to build a more stable foreign policy. And the reason why is that spheres of influence approach that Trump is returning us to led our world into 2 world wars. It has produced the most unstable, most dangerous, and most catastrophic foreign policy moment in human history. And the idea that he wants to return to that kind of style is just so devastating. To literally threaten a NATO ally and say that we're going to take what we want. Again, that's just this mob boss tactics that is fraying and weakening our alliances abroad. And I have leaders from other countries literally calling me, and they're just saying, what is happening to your nation right now? They're literally just in shock that America so quickly can be seen as a pariah state. Well, another country, they literally said, we have most of our time that they are spending in other countries dealing with national security is now to try to prepare against potential American interference or action. We are now seen as a national security threat to other countries, which I just find so insane as someone who worked in national security before.
Do you see this as the end of NATO? Is this de facto the end to NATO and to our alliances with the people who we've been allied with for the last 80 years, if we're now threatening military action against Denmark, a NATO ally?
I don't think we're there yet, but the fact that I can't say definitively, I think shows just how sad things are. I worked on a NATO military base in Afghanistan. I was there, and I had alongside shoulder to shoulder with servicemen and women from other nations that were risking their lives. Many were killed in defense of a military operation that was done to protect the United States. Like the only time that Article 5 of NATO has ever been invoked of collective defense is for the defense of America after September 11th. So, I take this very personally as someone who, was in Afghanistan alongside our NATO allies. They protected me and other Americans while we were doing our work. And the idea that we would treat them in this type of way is wrong. The one thing I will say is, while it may not necessarily mark the demise or the end of the NATO alliance, I think it's too premature. But what it is doing is that it's getting all of these countries to recognize that they can no longer rely on America. America is no longer the indispensable nation. We are now the unreliable nation. And other countries are literally telling me that they're now taking actions to reduce their reliance and dependence on America, including our NATO European allies and Canada and others. they're now saying that they are taking active steps to make sure that they can de-link from the United States when it comes to reliance on military equipment, intelligence, on economic security. So that's just going to leave us weaker and, frankly, in a less influential place going forward. So, these are the types of actions. While Trump tries to talk about it as a source of American strength, it's actually going to hinder our ability. Our strength has come from our ability to build coalitions, and Trump is breaking them at every chance he gets.
All right, let's talk about January 6th. And Michelle, you had a couple of great observations here, Senator, about your role, obviously, on January 6th. But Michelle, go ahead.
No, well, first of all, I would just love to hear about, what that day was like for you. How did it start? How did it end? How did you feel throughout the day?
Yeah, January 6th, 5 years ago, it actually started I was in a good mood when I started because we had just won 2 runoff elections in Georgia for the Senate. It felt like, we're moving in a different direction. We're leaving behind the first Trump term, which I had hoped at the time would be the only Trump term. And it felt like we were turning a corner. I remember I was driving into the Capitol and I had told my staff not to come into work just because we didn't know exactly what had happened. And I was driving in and I had assumed that if there was any problem or disturbance, it would be outside on the streets, which at the time was pretty quiet. So, I had gotten into work and I remember I was being prepared to go down to the House chamber when I got an alert basically said to shelter in place. So I immediately took shelter and eventually was able to take shelter in my office. But I didn't understand what had happened at first, as we were trying to figure out what all was unfolding in real time. But as someone who, again, I worked in Iraq and Afghanistan before, I've sheltered in place before, but never imagined I would have to do so at the United States Capitol. And those are the types of things that just really stick with me as I look back on it. The last thing I'll just say is that I remember coming back into session after a couple hours while the riot was unfolding. Eventually, they cleared out the Capitol, and we came back into session that night. And I had hoped that the shock of what had unfolded would be what I call a defibrillator moment for the country. It would be this moment that would kind of shock us back into some normal heart rhythm again. And I remember being on the floor of the House and hearing my colleagues talking. And, then Kevin McCarthy was talking about how this was his, the darkest day of his time in government. I was thinking maybe the Republicans are going to drop their challenge to the Electoral College count. But unfortunately, they ultimately ended up just literally pulling out of their pockets the same speech that they were going to read had the riot not happened, as if nothing had ensued at the Capitol that day. They just went right back to the election denialism. And that was really the moment that I understood that even an attack on the Capitol was not enough to break our broken politics out of its just morass, out of its just challenge that it's facing. And now 5 years later, I think that feeling that I felt at that moment is all the more pronounced, to see where we're at right now, 5 years later, in so much more of a divided time. We're even more divided now than we were on January 6th. We're even more precarious of a situation now in our democracy than we were 5 years ago. It's something that really stands out to me.
Well, that leads me to my next question because, throughout the day, I'm sure you looked into the eyes of your Republican colleagues and saw the fear and the horror in their eyes and their faces. And to your point, here we are 5 years later, more divided than ever. Do you think that they have told themselves the lie so much now that they believe it? Or are they just pretending? Or is it a little bit of both? Because to listen to these people pretend that this didn't even happen as we come up on this 5th anniversary of, in my opinion, the darkest day in American history, at least, in modern history. Um, what's going on over there with them? Is this all an act, or do they believe their BS?
Yeah. Well, as you said, they had real fear in their eyes that day.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember coming back into the House of Representatives. It felt like it was like a funeral. Like people were hugging each other. We had just survived this ordeal. And to then have this denialism, or what I call kind of purposeful amnesia. I mean, it's amnesia for a reason. And the reason is still fear. But now it's fear of Donald Trump, and it's fear of losing their job, losing their livelihood, and frankly, fear of just actual potential physical threats against them if they say something. I mean, I've had a number of Republicans tell me, especially those that voted to impeach Trump, I mean, they were under actual threat, physical threat at the time. So, there's that. And it just, I'll be honest with you, it just confuses me so much. I mean, this is a good job, but it's not that good. It's not that good that
right.
You try to twist
There's life outside, right?
Yeah, like that, like why would you betray your own understanding of reality and betray your understanding of history? Like, one can still say that they are Republican and conservative and believe that Donald Trump is a better president than Joe Biden, while still admitting that of what happened on January 6th, right?
Right.
It's like they're like but it's sad. We just had a situation here the other week in the Senate where there was like a nomination hearing for some judges, and they were asked about what happened on January 6th, and they could not get the words out of their mouth, and it's because they know that if they did so, their nominations to be judges would probably be pulled by Donald Trump in the White House.
Right. Well, and it's like they don't want to face anything, right? I mean, I saw today that there was the plaque, the famous plaque that was made to honor.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was made to honor the police officers and law enforcement on that day, but nobody knows where it is.
Yeah, no one knows where it is. It's like buried in some warehouse with the Raiders of the Lost Ark, and
how does that happen?
And it's just like mind-boggling to me that this is something we passed a law to put this forward, and they refuse to move that forward, refuse to again admit, and it's it's so sad to see the Capitol Police just to have their bravery diminished and pushed aside, and basically just denying what they went through.
Yeah.
I remember last year, probably the most powerful experience I had last year on the anniversary was I was walking by a group of Capitol Police officers, and a number of them were, telling each other where they were during the attacks. And I was listening to one officer talking about how he was on the west-facing side of the Capitol, outside facing the mall, and it was in literal hand-to-hand combat with people who were trying to break into the Capitol. And several of the officers were clearly new since January 6th, so they were not there. So they were asking questions, and you could hear these officers, just how hard it was for them to relive it. And the idea that some of the people, and by some I mean many of the people that they are sworn to protect, those of us as members of Congress, that a sizable number of us deny what happened on that day is just it is so offensive to me that the Capitol Police are still to this day sworn to protect those of us, of which some refuse to acknowledge what they went through and the pain and the loss that they experienced on that day. And I just find that to be disgraceful.
Yeah, there are many iconic images from that day for those of us who watched this all unfold in disbelief on television. And I think anybody watching this can remember just the noose with, outside the Capitol, certainly the shaman, all of these people storming Nancy Pelosi's, horrible, but, and certainly pictures of your colleague, Josh Hawley, running down the hall shortly after pumping his fist. But one of the images, and the reason that we're so just grateful to you for coming on today is, I think in some ways, one of the saddest is of you on your knees, scrubbing the mess from the Capitol, from the people's house. I know the White House is also called that, but to me, the Capitol is the people's house, cleaning up the mess that these insurrectionists brought in. And, that's become in and of itself a very iconic image. I know that your suit from that day, your blue wool suit, is now hanging in the Smithsonian, which must be a very surreal thing, I'm sure, for you. But part of it to me is you of all people, because that image of you is so associated with that day, and in a lovely way, but I think also in a very tragic way. What is the reaction that you get from your Republican colleagues on days like this, when to such an extent you, by virtue of what you did, kind of embody this decency that they all pretend was not necessary because they pretend none of this happened in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, they pretend like it was just any old day.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I don't clean the Capitol every day. It's not something that is needed on any other day except for on that incredibly dark day. And it is something that's set apart. I shared this story earlier about how disgusted I was that so many of my colleagues just went back to the election denialism, after that riot. And that was actually when I left. I actually walked out of the House chamber out of just deep frustration. And that's when I walked into the rotunda for the very first time and saw just this beautiful room. And, I'm sure the two of you have been in it before, but I believe that the rotunda is the most beautiful room in America. The literal center point of our democracy, where presidents lay in state. And to see that sacred ground, defiled with just broken glass, broken flags, and just, debris, broken furniture, was heartbreaking and something that I'll never forget. And I just felt this impulse in me. I could not leave that room in that condition for any second longer than it needed to. And that's when I just felt the impulse to start cleaning. I didn't go in and plan to do it, but I felt compelled to. And so, it's interesting when I kind of look back on it. I was just in the rotunda maybe about 20 minutes ago, when I was going over for votes. And every time I go in that room, I remember that day. In fact, I was pointing out there's very little remnants at all of January 6th. They changed out all the broken glass and all these other things. The only thing that I can see, and I pointed out to my staff tonight, was you can see above the center doors where the rioters had broken in. You can see little kind of pock marks on the metal above the right by the exit sign of where the rubber bullets were being fired at. And that's the only thing I can see left. But to your question of just like, my Republican colleagues, it's just, they literally are just want to pretend like nothing happened, and they do nothing to commemorate January 6th. They do nothing to pay tribute to the Capitol police officers who saved our lives that day. And I just find that to be so indicative of this moment. And I think that also why I just find this to be so tragic, because, like when you're observing a horrible day like what we experienced 5 days ago, you want to believe that the worst is behind us. You want to believe like, wow, that was horrible what we went through 5 years ago. But as I was kind of remarking to you, like, I think we're in even more dangerous time right now. And I feel really sad to report that to you. Like, I feel really, it pains me to tell you that we're not in a better condition. I'm not necessarily saying that the threat to our democracy will take the same form. It may not necessarily be a riot in the Capitol again, but the precariousness, the normalization of political violence, the numbing of the American people because of just the overwhelming barrage of what we're witnessing right now in terms of the dismantling of the government that was founded by our founding fathers and set forth in the Constitution is just a lot to process. And so, for me, I kind of look at January 6th as like it was this, I think it'll go down as just this incredibly important inflection point in this moment. I don't know exactly how the story will end, but I do think that this day will be seen as a defining day of this era of American politics. And it's on me and many others to try to hopefully give the ending to make it a better ending than what we've seen so far.
Do you think the fever breaks when Trump is gone? Or do you think, and I don't mean gone in the sense that he's gone from the White House, I mean gone from the political scene altogether. Or do you think that it has now become so normalized, what you're talking about, that your Republican colleagues will continue to carry on that MAGA mantle with all of the attendant issues that you just talked about, even after Trump is no longer with us?
Yeah. I kind of think of January 6th as this like, this injury that we suffered. We suffered a wound, and while we survived that wound, we are unfortunately now experiencing the infection that comes afterwards. And I don't think that we're in a strong place right now when it comes to it. So this is bigger than Trump. We learned that. When Biden took the Oval Office and we had 4 years there, we saw that the problems that we face are deeper than just one person. It's more than just about Trump. It's deep to the bone, and the amount of distrust that is pervasive in our country right now is overwhelming. And it's something where, especially when you see how Trump pardons all the January 6th offenders, he is rewarding that behavior. He's rewarding and giving oxygen to that distrust that is being sowed. So again, this is a generational problem that we're going to face. This is something that my 8-year-old and my 10-year-old will have to deal with when they are adults. And not everyone will link it back to January 6th with such a direct, bold, straight line as what I have laid out here. But I do think that January 6th was the defining moment that set the tone for everything that came afterwards. Trump, if you look at Trump looks back, get in his mind, what does January 6th mean to him? Not don't think about it in terms of what it means to me. What it means to him is he saw that January 6th and what ensued in the direct aftermath was the most humiliating moment of his life. He never wants to go through that again. And you think through, what is the lesson that Donald Trump learned from that day? What he learned was people like Mike Pence and the Republicans that voted to impeach him, that he sees that as the weakness, that gave rise to his humiliation. And you see how in his second term, he has learned from that and now demands not just loyalty anymore. He demands fealty now. He demands absolute loyalty in that type of way. And so that's what is driving so much of the problem that we're facing, is just the absolute erosion and dissolution of our institutions, and how that day has really brought forward, this again, new era of politics. It's just, we don't know how it ends now.
You know, you were talking about your kids, and I think about this all the time, as an elder millennial, coming into adulthood with Barack Obama, in our world. And it was the most hopeful period of time, at least in my lifetime, to be an American, and to know that kids now, or at least the Gen Z kids, they will never know what that felt like. Their entire existence has been this, like you said, distrust, division, anger, cruelty. So having all three of us experience that wonderful time, and without, being nostalgic to the point of it not being helpful, how do you stay hopeful in these moments? Like with you and your family, how do you spend your time? Because I know obviously you're in it all day, every day, because it's quite literally your job to do that. But when you're alone and with your family, like how do you stay centered? How do you stay grounded?
Yeah. One of the more profound conversations I've had in the last few years was I spoke to a group of college students a few years back, and I talked about how after September 11th, I felt a call to serve and stepped up and talked about my career path and why I care so much about public service and serving this country. And all of a sudden they open up for question and answers, and I thought the questions were going to be something like, why are you so awesome and doing all this incredible work serving our country? But the very first question was why are you so patriotic? And I was not expecting that. And I asked, can you say that again? He said, why do you care about patriotism? He said that he's like, I'm 19. I don't know anybody my age or younger that would use the word patriotic to describe themselves. And I was quite taken by that. But, when you think about it, someone who was 19, 20 years old at the time, this was a few years ago, they were born into a country in two wars.
Yeah.
They, were in kindergarten, first, second grade when the Great Recession happened. They, came into the teenage years with the Mitch McConnell Senate and they seen the Tea Party movement rise, and they haven't seen an America that inspires them. They haven't seen a kind of governance that can give them a sense. They have no institutional memory of anything that resembles unity in this country. And so I'm sad. I'm sad that my kids are 8 and 10 now, and the president that has been the biggest part of their life is Donald Trump.
Yeah. A decade of this nonsense. Yeah.
And like, for me, like, to have to tell them not to emulate the behavior or the words or the values of the president, who, oftentimes you were talked about to like revere them, the Mount Rushmores, you had them on your ruler in grade school, it's hard. Yeah. And, I just remember when I came home, I came back to New Jersey a couple days after January 6th, I went straight to pick my kids up from daycare. And we didn't tell them what had happened, but I remember my kids coming out and they were slow to come up to me, and they gave me a big hug, and they asked me if I was okay. And it was interesting that even though we didn't talk to them about it, they had heard. I don't know if it was through their teacher or what, but they just knew that something had happened, that something happened at my work. And still to this day, 5 years later, I've yet to be able to find the words to talk to my kids about what happened on January 6th. I've tried, but it just never really, like, it's not something that comes natural to explain to them. And I certainly don't want to give them the impression that, my work is dangerous. But But, now after what we've seen with political assassinations and other things, like, they see that I have to take precautions now, and like, they don't come to my political events anymore. My wife and I travel separately to.
What is that?
That is horrendous.
What does that say? Because somebody, and I'm sorry, but I have worked for I don't know how many politicians on and off for the last 30 years, and I have never heard that before. But of course, it makes all the sense in the world, right?
Yeah.
But it never occurred to me, somebody who started out as a 22-year-old driving a former member of Congress, current member of Congress, but at the time was still a member of Congress around, that we had anything to worry about. And the fact that you have to say that now, not just about yourself, but about your children, and having to take those kinds of precautions is just astounding. And the part that I guess that breaks my heart is I would say that I would hope one day they're old enough to be able to go to the Smithsonian and see their dad's suit there, but I'm surprised it's still hanging there. I'm surprised.
Yeah, I was wondering too. Is it still there?
I don't think it's being displayed.
I mean, isn't that
but
crazy?
that's because I don't think anything January 6th is being
right. The erasure of the whole day, all of it, and I have to wonder: are they just throwing this stuff out? Are they keeping it where the plaque is? Like, is there a little place somewhere where they keep this stuff?
Look at the end of Raiders.
I remember Kevin McCarthy tried to use this line saying, enough with all this back and forth about January 6th. We need to turn the page, move forward. And I said, look, you got to write the page before you turn the page. We haven't even written it yet, because it just continues to be written and then erased and then lies thrown in. I mean, it's just, it's tough. To just try to think about this question, why is it so important that we document and observe what happened on that day? And I think what we see is so much of the erasure that happens. I don't know, for me, I think it's partly because I've lived, I was in diplomacy before this. I've lived and worked in countries that had either failing democracies or authoritarian regimes. I saw what happens when people can just choose what truth they want. They can choose what history to write. And I see that erasure happening, and you see how you lose the soul of a country. You lose the heart of a nation, when you no longer have that sense of freedom to express. But freedom to express also means, the freedom to be able to have access to that information for which you can then form your expression about. And so, I just think so much of that is under threat. But I will tell you, I don't necessarily see it getting better. I don't necessarily want to paint such a dark image, but I don't see a moment anywhere in the near or mid future where I don't necessarily have to worry when I do a town hall, about what could happen. I wish I could tell you that, but I just don't think anytime in the near future I will ever be able to get to that moment where I don't, in some part of my mind, think something could happen. And so
you're describing a failing democracy. I mean, that's in fact what you're describing. Is that fair to say?
We're declining. Yeah, we're definitely declining. I'm not saying it's irreversible. I do think some of the damage that's been done is unfixable. Yeah. But the overall trend, I don't think it's irreversible. That's why I'm doing this. I'm honest with you and telling you, I never imagined I'd be doing this job. I am a public school kid, a son of immigrants. I wanted to be in diplomacy and serve in that capacity. I was a non-political career public servant. I never wanted to be in politics. This is not something that I dreamt about. And still to this day, I'll be honest, I can't stand politics. I can't stand so much about this. And especially when I tell you, the concern about safety and security, like, why would I put myself through this when all I want to do is just be with my kids? But the reason why I do this is because, like, I'm worried about what kind of America my kids are going to grow up in. Like, they're 8 and 10 now. That means, like, I got about maybe 15 years before they're out and get a job and move out of the house. Though I know colleagues of mine are saying, no, they'll just move into your basement. but like, I got about 15 years, before I feel like they're kind of out on their own. And like, that terrifies me.
Yeah.
So like, with every fiber of my body right now, like, I got to do everything I can over these next 15 years to try to get this country in a better place where I would feel more confident and less anxious about them being out on their own. And I don't know if I can succeed. Like, I don't know if we can fix this all or at least get it to a better place in 15 years, but like, I gotta at least try.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, when you ask me about this job, like, that's why I'm doing it. I wouldn't necessarily say it comes from a sense of hope overarching. It comes from a sense of necessity. Like, this is my home. This is the world that this is the place where my kids are going to grow up and grow old. So like, I have no other choice. I have no other place to go. So I feel necessity. Now, I will say I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't have some hope that it could change. Otherwise, I would just
right. What's the point? Right.
I'd probably leave this job, make a whole lot of money, and then try to like use that money to insulate my family. Right? But like, I'm not doing that because like, I still believe that we can fix it. But my answer to this question of how, how do we heal this country? I don't have all the answers, but what I think it requires is a reigniting of the concept of public service. Like, I think we need a new, like, ask not what this country can do for you kind of moment, a new kind of call to action. I'm not sure exactly how to spark it, but I've been actually trying to use this 250th anniversary of the country.
Just thinking that, yeah.
Try to have and spark a national discussion and debate about the value of service, to try to supercharge civics education in this country. I'm pushing forward on legislation that's trying to create a national service, architecture of a program in our nation, like something that can just try to do this at mass scale.
Yeah, and before we let you go, because you've been so generous with your time, I will say it's not just up to you. It is up to all of us. And I know that you are doing some democracy building with a small d in your home state of New Jersey as well. I would think, and you tell me if I'm wrong, inspired, I think, by what you're talking about now, which is that there needs to be a bunch of people who are not just elected officials, but just regular people who have access to democracy and to the ballot and to ways that they can perpetuate democratic with lowercase d norms, not just at the national level, but also throughout the local and county and state orbits, because obviously this can't be all fixed by one senator or by even 100 senators, even if all 100 senators wanted to be committed to this. So the good news is, I think, from what you're saying, that the burden is not just on your shoulders. It's on all of ours. And I know you're working hard to make that happen in New Jersey.
That's right. Because if you look at, you asked me earlier if this is something that, that this problem will go away as Trump recedes from power. And I said no. And that's in part because what I see Trump being a leader of is as much as I disagree with him across the board, he is a movement leader. He is the leader of a movement, and the movement is bigger than just him. It is really taking on a life of its own. So if we are thinking about how to be able to counter this, how to be able to mobilize what's needed in this country to get us on a better trajectory, it needs to be about movement building. And so for me, so much of what I see my work as doing is trying to be part of this effort to grow a movement that fights corruption, to grow a movement that understands that we need to focus on restoring trust from the American people back into our democracy, to be able to fight against the disinformation and the lies. And so I very much see the work that I'm doing, not just within the four walls of the Capitol or just in the halls of Washington, D.C., but it is about building a movement. And back home in New Jersey, it's a perfect example where I am trying to lead a movement that is standing up against a broken politics. And back in my home state, unfortunately, a lot of those politics are often led by people in my own political party. But I often say, look, like, for me to be a credible fighter against corruption, you got to stand up against corruption no matter who is violating, our public trust. And if that's Democrats, you have to call them out on it too. Like in my state of New Jersey, like 84% of people believe that their elected officials are corrupt. So that's 84% of people in New Jersey. I mean, that's a devastating number. Like, how can democracy function with that much distrust? So it shows you just how deep the problem is. But the way I look at it is, yes, that's a devastating understanding of our democracy, but it's also, I look at that as the flip side of saying, like, look, that's 84% of the people of New Jersey that can potentially be interested in joining my movement to fight corruption. And that is 84% of people is across political parties. It's across the political spectrum. It's something that can break through and not just keep us in our tribal boxes. Yeah. Because like so much of it, the challenge that we face right now is about that tribalism, is about just how reflexively partisan we've become. And so I try to find those things that can break us out of that, whether it's fighting corruption or, my effort right now to bring about a caregiving movement that's going to, help mobilize families that are struggling with family members suffering from Alzheimer's, dementia, and other illnesses. Like, those are things that can break through the tribalism, hopefully. Yeah. And, it may not be a defibrillator moment that can right the brokenness of this country, but, hopefully it can be, a movement that is able to just touch a fundamental human aspect of who we are, that can remind us that we're bigger than just our political parties. We are more complex than just any particular individual that we follow, that we as Americans embody something much larger, more profound than what we are often reduced to in this lowest common denominator media and politics environment that we so often find ourselves in. And that's what I hope we can try to find again as a country.
Well, we are so grateful to you, and thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for everything that you've done the last 5 years, and even before that, when you first got to the House in 2018.
Yes, thank you.
As a New Jersey expat, as a Jersey girl, I'm especially grateful that you my better. So
I'm waving from across the river.
Thanks for having me today.
Very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Julie, wow. What an incredibly sobering conversation that I think needed to be had. I, for one, am very appreciative of not just his time that he so graciously gave to us, but for his honesty. And these things aren't easy to talk about, but I think that sugarcoating the moment that we're living in does no one any favors. How do you feel?
Listen, I think it is remarkable that he effectively said that the United States is not necessarily a failing democracy, but it's a declining one. Hear that, and to hear him also say that he's heard from leaders all over the world.
Yeah.
And this is somebody, again, who served as a diplomat, served alongside, not in the military, but alongside our military in theaters of war like Iraq and Afghanistan.
Right.
To now use the terminology that you would use about really third world countries.
Yep.
To now be used against what used to be the mightiest and greatest country in the world.
Absolutely.
Is just sobering. And I don't want to overstate or interpret for people what he said. Obviously, they just heard it themselves. But there is something very much to be said for the fact that you have a United States senator who has access to all kinds of information that the rest of us don't have, sounding the alarm about what's happening to our country right now, and basically saying, I'm in this because of my kids. I got to save democracy for my two sons. And not saying it kind of in a throwaway politician line, but really sounding the alarm and saying, hey, things are not going to turn out well for us.
Yeah.
If we don't do something. And what that something is, sounds to me like he doesn't know, and the rest of us don't know.
Yeah. And you know, all I kept thinking about is the end of the Handmaid's Tale series. There's this really profound conversation that June has with her mother. And if you haven't seen it yet, sorry, spoiler alert. But, you know, she tells her mom, I have to go back and fight. I have to keep fighting. And her mom's like, why does it have to be you? Why? You don't have to. And she said, yes, I do. I have to do this for my children. And if we don't do it, they'll come for our children and our grandchildren. They will never stop. And I remember watching that, feeling that I know you have, and we all have, that this is a marathon and they're never going to stop. They don't take a day off. Hell, they don't take an hour off, these people. And so, you know, we can be sad. We can be, you know, feel down and discouraged, but we have to pick ourselves back up and we have to keep going. We have to, because this country is worth fighting for. Like, democracy is not a, you know, a single person sport. Like, it's a team sport. We all have to participate. It's hard. These times are very, very, very hard. And, you know, the senator, I don't think of him as one of these, certainly these flamboyant members of the Senate or Congress, like, you know, Ted Cruz or anybody who's just, you know, lofty, saying things all the time. He's a very matter of fact, very honest person, at least from what I've seen. I know your experience with the senator, I know you've known him for a long time, but he doesn't just say these things. I mean, he was speaking from his gut.
He's a thoughtful guy. And he is, he's right in that there are other things he could do. And I have to say, I remember speaking to him when he decided to run for the Senate. And it was at a time when nobody really gave him much of a shot, because the person who was the front runner in that race was the wife of Phil Murphy, the sitting governor of New Jersey. And
weird.
The entire party structure in New Jersey kind of got behind Tammy Murphy, Phil Murphy's wife, because she was the wife of the governor. And of course, they all were responsive to what the governor wanted. And I remember having this discussion with him and kind of saying to him, well, this is, you know, good for you, but this is kind of a big risk. And I think his attitude was like, so if I lose, I lose. Like, I'm, you know, it's not about being in the House. And, you know, it sounds like a kind of a self-evident thing. Like, okay, I'll take the shot. If I don't win, I'm not going to be in the House of Representatives anymore. I'm giving up my House seat to run, and God bless, you know, whatever.
Right.
But think about how many members of Congress, and I say that about people who I consider to be my very close friends, who have been in the House for a very long time, who cannot envision a life outside of Washington, not envision a life outside of being in the House or the Senate. And this is not so much about Senator Kim, but it is about the point that he made, which is, how completely morally bankrupt do you have to be to bow down to a man who has denied the fact that you almost died. You Republicans died along with the
Yeah,
Democrats.
like you think that they weren't coming for y'all too? I mean, like,
They were
come
coming
on.
for you. I mean, we all saw Josh Hawley run for his life.
Yeah, Mark
Right?
Wayne, whatever. I saw him run into the door. I mean,
Mark Mullen, like all of these people. And so the point is, how desperate do you have to be in Congress
yeah.
to subsume everything about you? I mean, this is not so much about what Senator Kim said, but it is relevant to the point that he was making, which is that I saw a quote from Bill Cassidy, who tweeted out today. Bill Cassidy, senator from Louisiana, who is a medical doctor, who was the deciding vote on RFK Jr., who was tweeting out, trashing the new schedule that HSS put out.
Oh, you got to be kidding me.
About vaccines, childhood vaccines, and saying this is absurd and this is ridiculous. We need to have these vaccines. They're life-saving.
If only there was something you could have done, Senator.
Man, you made this happen. And the question, and he made this happen not because he truly believes that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is good at his job or would have been good at his job.
Right.
He did it because he was threatened with the primary and he didn't want to lose.
He was afraid.
He was afraid.
Right.
And to me, there's really nothing more you could do with your life.
Right. Find a hobby.
You have saved thousands of lives.
If not millions.
If not millions, by voting against Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they primaried you, you would have had another couple years in the Senate and you could have gone on to either go back to being a doctor or go do something else with your life or just retire and sail off into the sunset. But it's to the point that Senator Kim was making. Like, it's not that good a gig.
No, right. I was thinking immediately of Congresswoman Ballin, who we talked to when we were doing Over It. She said, there's life outside of this. There is life outside of this.
Yeah. We got to get
the seat doesn't belong to me. The seat doesn't belong to you.
Yep.
It belongs to the American people. And to the point also of him talking about the diplomacy, because again, he worked in diplomacy before he got into politics, and he was saying, politics is not what I want to do. And I'm sure he's not the first person to say that. He certainly will not be the last. And not just the VP-ness of it, right? I mean, you worked in Washington, you know that like VP is real life. I mean, that shit is real. But it's like, if Veep was a horror movie, is like kind of what we're living through now. And, I know someone who I worked with last year and got to know, former CIA, worked in national security, had a lot of conversations with him into this administration as well. And what he said to me and others, this was back in 2024, said that his colleagues and friends in national security abroad said that all of these countries and the people that he knows these nations were preparing for the United States to become a failed state. And I will never forget hearing that for the first time, and it sent chills through my bones.
Well, you just heard that here.
Right.
I mean, that's what
I felt like I was reliving it. I was like, holy shit,
Yeah.
This is exactly what I've been hearing.
We just had that confirmed by Senator Kim that yes, people are preparing. I mean, to have our NATO allies now think about having an alliance where the United States may be friend or foe is like, forget that this is the Soviet Union's wet dream here, right? Forget that they have basically put a stake in the heart of NATO without firing a shot.
Yeah.
Because they have. Mm-hmm. This all came about because one man was elected, because a few people back in 2016 vote for the girl.
Yep. Couldn't vote for the lady. Yep. Just didn't like her.
She wasn't likable.
I don't like her laugh.
Yeah. And, the one question I didn't have a chance to ask Senator Kim that I wish I would have asked is, as much as we're sitting here talking about how the Republicans have amnesia about January 6th, what about the American people? Because those are the people who voted Donald Trump back into office.
Nobody wants to talk about it. I mean, honestly, is 60 Minutes doing a piece on the 5-year anniversary? Doubt it.
But what happened 2 years ago? What happened, or not less, what happened a year and change ago that people 3.5 years or a little bit less after 4 years after January 6th, decided that, you know what, we'll have this, we'll just let that crew take over again. Like, what exactly happened?
When the senator said the word distrust, that really struck me also, because for me personally, there have been 3 major inflection points for me to look around to my fellow Americans and have lost trust in my neighbors. And one of them was 2016. The second was COVID. And the third was 2024. When there was a violent, deadly insurrection incited by the President of the United States of America, in which these insurrectionists were chanting the names of members of Congress and wanted to hang Mike Pence. These things happened. And it's the fact that we as a nation elected this man again after 34 felony convictions. I mean, let's aside from the insurrection, right? Here's the felonies and everything else, right? But in terms of January 6th, the weather was so cold they couldn't have the inauguration outside, and they had to hold it inside in the rotunda. What a scene. What a scene. You know, he never felt better.
It could have been a balmy 65 degrees, and he would have still had an excuse to hold it in the rotunda, because he wanted to do it. He wanted to go back to the scene of the crime. And put us like every criminal. He wanted to go back to the scene of the crime in order to pat himself on the back for committing the first crime.
Look at me. Nobody can get me. I'm unkillable. I'm unbeatable. Nobody beats me.
No, but it is truly like, you have these serial killers going back to the scene of the crime. Have that, because so they can feel good about the fact that they got away with it.
I think about like Robert Durst going in that Wegmans to steal the sandwich. I'm like, know, there's a compulsion, right?
That's what he did. He went back to the scene of the crime. All right. I know this is a tough day for all of us as Americans today. I am so glad, Michelle, that we were able to get Senator Kim on.
Very grateful to him.
First time. He gave us a lot more time than we thought we'd have with him, which I'm even more
very
grateful
generous.
for. And very generous to staff who I'm sure as a former staffer are probably ripping their hair out. Very grateful to the staff for giving us this opportunity as well. On that note, everybody, please take care of yourselves today. I know that it's a tough day for me. I know, Michelle, it's a tough day for you. I'm sure it's a tough day for a lot of us today. We have not forgotten. They want us to forget. They want us to go underground remembering. There will be no official commemoration in the Capitol today. There will be no official commemoration at the White House today. There will be no official commemoration anywhere in our federal government today. But we remember, we are deeply grateful to the Capitol Police, to all the officers who survived, to New Jersey's own Brian Sicknick, who did not. We think about him today as well. Officer Sicknick, speaking of, from Senator Kim's state of New Jersey. And to everybody who was there, to everybody who watched it on TV take place, to everybody who still believes that we are a democracy worth saving, we are grateful to you. We are with you, and we will get through this somehow together. All right. Thanks, everybody.